Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, not so much to be understood as to understand, not so much to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we awake to eternal life. That was a prayer by St. Francis of Assisi.
Our meditation this morning is in observance of the summer harvest, or Lammas, and to lead us in that are members of the Princeton Evergreen Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans.
As you use, we often celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. Today, on this early harvest festival, we celebrate community with every being on the planet. As you came into the sanctuary, I hope you were holding a fruit or veg that you brought with you. A few were left out there. Does anyone have ones to spare in case somebody doesn't have one? Okay, you have a couple to spare. Please look around near you to see if you don't have one. See how many we can get redistributed. And of course, if you're at home and you don't have a fruit or vegetable handy, you have a moment to go do that. So, settle in comfortably to wherever you are. And now, imagine, closing your eyes if you like, that this fruit or vegetable is still attached to its stem and the stem to the stalk or branch from which it came. Hold this fruit as if you were about to pick it. Imagine yourself outdoors. Is it sunny or cloudy? Feel the warmth of the sun or the coolness of the breeze. The ground under your feet. Is it warm? Is it cool? Perhaps you are barefoot. Once you have reached, I'm sorry, I have one page. Now let your consciousness travel up the stem, along the stalk or branch or down the trunk, and along the roots of the plant or tree into the earth. Follow the roots downward, past the roots of other plants, the worms that turn the soil. If you like, move on, past the end of the roots, into all that feeds them. Recall that this is the source of the food you eat every day, and thus the source of all of your own being, the source that has fed you since before your own beginning, the source that fed your forebears from the beginning of the world's first life. Once you have reached the source, as you understand it, of all that nourishes you, sit with it for a time. Listen for whatever it may have to tell you. Does the earth have a question for you? How will you respond? Do you have a question to ask? Give yourself a moment to frame a question or to send a message, or simply to feel your connection to the source, the interdependent web of all existence. In a moment, we will take our leave for the time being and return the way we came. Let your awareness move from the soil back into the roots you follow to this place. Follow the path of the roots, back up through the ground, observing the roots of other plants, the worms that turn the soil. Follow the roots back to the stem or trunk. Move your awareness upward to the branch, outward along the branch to the stem, and return to the fruit or vegetable that you hold in your hand. Is it still attached? Pick it now if you like. Holding your fruit, recall the room in which you took it from the basket. Feel the room around you. Feel the floor under you as you move your feet. Be aware of the other people in this room with you. And when you are ready, let your eyes relax open and be here now.
A little while ago, my husband asked me if I hear my thoughts. Do you actually hear yourself think, like a voice in your head speaking your thoughts? He asked. My husband claims that, with the exception of swearing in his mind when he does something like stub his toe, that this voice is something he just simply does not hear. He even told me about a specific memory he has from his childhood growing up in Slovakia. He was watching an American movie in which a voiceover was used to express the main character's thoughts. And this stuck in his memory because he had never seen something like that before, and it seemed strange to him. I find his claim to be very hard to wrap my head around, a little bit hard to believe even, because I hear a steady stream of narration and commentary in my mind from the moment I open my eyes in the morning until the moment I fall asleep at night. It sometimes feels as if I'm two people. There's the outside me living in the world, talking to others. And then there's the inside me living behind my eyes and talking to, well, me. And together, outside and inside me, constantly observe, take notes, make comments, and compose little essays. My very good friend, fellow UU congregant, and a professional astrologer, Drake Bear, some of you might know him, he assures me that this is all very normal. My sign is Gemini, and this is represented by the twins. This means two minds, thick as thieves, residing together in one body. Where did this non-ceasing inner voice develop, I wonder? I'm not sure if the narrative voiceover was really unique to American television, but if so, I certainly did watch a lot of television as a kid and certainly would have been exposed. When I was young, I read a fair amount of Garfield comics, which mostly consisted of Garfield the cat's thought bubbles. And I also cherished my very large Calvin and Hobbes anthologies. Another comic, this one revolving around the silent exchanges between a boy and his favorite stuffed animal. Very much inspired by my older sister, I started keeping journals as early as elementary school, and I continued to do so into adulthood. When I read them now, I see they began with the most mundane happenings of who did what at recess. But over time, they developed into very long and deep contemplations about life. In high school, I was enthralled with Dostoevsky's writing style, which is about 10 parts deliberation to 1 part action. And to this day, I still love reading straight up, uncut philosophy, even the densest varieties, just for fun. So any of the above could have fostered my inner voice. But no matter where I picked up the habit of hearing myself think, there is no doubt that I now find great pleasure in hearing thoughts, be they my own or those of others. Still, now that I've learned from my husband that living without my voice is even a thing that exists, I've started to wonder how much my own inner voice might be amplifying all of the personal anxieties, frustrations, and insecurities that often flood my mind. I wonder this because, as many of you who have met my husband, Matej, may know, he is the perfect example of a genuinely easygoing, upbeat, constantly optimistic person. And this, I promise you, is his baseline attitude. He really is that genuinely happy most of the time. It seems like what weighs me down just rolls off his back with ease. And I wonder, could it maybe just be that he's relishing all of that peace and quiet in his head? Sometimes I imagine my mind as a boat that starts to get crowded and unsteady. I figured out over time that the best way for me to not drown in my own thoughts is to enlist my inner voice in a special rescue mission. I can direct it to recite a rhythmic repetition of carefully curated words. And this has the power to corral, refocus, and redirect my attention. Some call this poetry, others may call it prayer. Call it whatever you want. In the end, it works all the same. The same voice that churns up these rough waters can calm them too. The ship is steadied, and I continue on my journey. Thank you.
A week and a half ago, I was having a lovely little spell at a family summer camp that we go to each year. Shannon, my wife, has been to 25 of these week-long UU summer camps that we go to in person. I've been to 24. Our kids have gone more or less since their births. We've missed the last 3 in one way or another because of the pandemic, but this year we were able to return. And we were really happy to be back there in the Carolina Smoky Mountains, surrounded by good friends we've had for years and in some cases decades. I was kayaking down a river on a nature trip. I am not a skilled kayaker, but fortunately the river called for more presence than skill. I mostly could float and paddle about, and the air was fresh and clean, the river beautiful, the trees majestic, the company lighthearted, interesting, and multi-generational. And we even came upon a bald eagle sitting atop a high branch over the river. As we floated underneath her, she spread her wings and soared down the river ahead of us just a bit, landing on another tree, I imagined, just so we could see her fly. It was quite idyllic for me. I'm happy in the woods, in water, in fresh air, being active and trying something unfamiliar. And the eagle was just the icing on the cake. And yet, as I floated down a little bit more, I began to think about our drive home in a few days. It was a long drive to be broken up with an overnight at a hotel in which we needed 2 adjoining rooms. I always worry about those adjoining rooms, mainly would we get them? I have trust issues with online hotel reservation systems and rental car systems. And for that matter, I hate it when you buy a ticket and it goes into your Apple Wallet on your phone. I never think it's going to work, even though it's always worked. I started thinking about all of that. And then I moved on to our trip to see family, which will happen a little later this month, a trip we've made many, many times, but one that these days relies on more negative tests before we start the drive. There's so much room for error in that. And after that, we'd blink and be at the start of school with 2 in middle and 1 in elementary. That means band, that means track, plays, parties, more wonderful occurrences that nonetheless speed at us and blur past us and can be tricky to keep up with. And I'm not sure what we're going to do for Thanksgiving this year. We've stayed up here in recent years, but there's always the chance that we go see family in Virginia. Or maybe this is the year that we go into the city for the parade if the weather is good. We have to figure that out. Christmas is busy but simple, but the rest of the year after that depends on so many variables of who needs to be where and when. There's a lot to figure out and so many unknowns, I thought, as I floated down the river, the eagle long gone, but with some surprisingly faster and larger rapids suddenly appearing ahead. I mentioned that I'm not a skilled kayaker, which anyone watching me at that moment would have noticed pretty clearly as I realized where I was and alarmingly backpedaled to try and not be aimed directly at the rocks in between which the water rushed. I find kayaks easy to steer, but impossible to control. And so every move only seemed to clear a more direct path to the rocks. And indeed, that's exactly where my kayak ended up. Nose wedged between 2 big boulders, fast white water rushing around me over the sit-on-top kayak that was now just as much in the river as upon it. Pushing off the rocks meant pushing against the current, which was pretty strong. Climbing out on top of the rocks would let me free the kayak, but then it would certainly shoot down the river while I'm standing on the rocks and I wouldn't be able to get back in. Or I could simply jump out and float away through the rapids, and maybe without my intervention, the kayak would follow the current and come after me. That would be fun, at least, but I wasn't sure it would work. One thing was certain. I was no longer thinking about Christmas, and adjoining rooms were the least of my concerns. The rocks, in a way, oriented me back to exactly where I was and exactly what I was doing. I was in a river, in a kayak, exercising a little control, but not much as the current carried me along. I was not in a hotel or on a different trip or driving to this school event or that one. It was July, it was not Thanksgiving. I was in a beautiful setting that I'd be best served to take in, to notice and be grateful for, not miss amidst all that might happen, all that could go wrong, that must be figured out. For in that moment, all that needed to be figured out was the kayak, the rocks, and the current. Some Buddhists have mala beads or mandala beads to help focus the mind on exactly what is happening in the moment. They differ in number and exact use according to different schools and traditions, but a common use is to repeat a mantra or chant as one moves bead by bead through the necklet or bracelet or string that holds them. This repetition returns one to a focused state. But in the practice, the unfocused moments become those real teachers, as it is then that you can return to the moment at hand. Those moments can be seen as a mistake because the point of the practice is to stay in the moment, not think about what has been or is to come. But it's those moments of moving away from the present that allow us to return to it with the aid of the beads. And so the really the most important part of any meditative practice, any prayer practice, is when we completely mess it up, when we turn away from the moment and start thinking about dinner or the drive or the to-do lists, and that lets us turn back to this moment of peace, of happiness. And that's where the practice, the discipline, the transformation happens. And the beads are a tactile tool to help with all of that. I don't use mala beads, but my most frequent mantra is all shall be well. Sometimes I write that down and keep it in my front pocket. It's always in my wallet. It comes from Julian of Norwich, a 14th and 15th century Christian anchoress, which meant that she lived in a small room off the sanctuary in a church as an act of devotion to God and God's people. Anchoresses were sometimes pastoral counselors and spiritual advisors for church people too, but they did so in a very secluded way. They freely never left their rooms, mostly prayed all day, studied, and in Julian's case, she wrote. She had mystic visions of God that answered the frequent anxiety that enveloped her mind, and in one of her visions, the Holy assures her that though life is difficult and full of travails, in the end, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And the reason that all shall be well in Julian's vision is because God ultimately is of love. Love eventually makes things well. Thus, it is at the center of Julian's mystic spiritual framework, just as it is in the center of what will likely be the newest expression of our own UUA principles next summer. The likely new UU principles, depending on a vote at the next General Assembly, includes a graphic that has love at the center as that which holds us together. And around love are commonly shared values of justice, transformation, generosity, equity, pluralism, and interdependence, with some changes still to come. Love is the center for Julian in the 14th century, and love is at the center for UUs in the 21st. I think we're in good company with that. And Julian wrote her visions down in the midst of the bubonic plague, which she herself contracted as a child and almost died from, but survived while half of Europe would not. It was devastating. People were terrified, and in her heightened spiritual state, she would share a message that through it all, love would hold us together and in the end carry us through. All shall be well is only that way because of love. For Julian, it was only God's love that mattered. For us, it can be the love that we proclaim, serve, and practice, even when, especially when, the times seem void of it. There is often a tendency to get swept up in the toxicities of dominant culture, and we reflect back what is being presented, sometimes in heightened concentration. Every church should always be very wary of doing that, for we are to point to a new way of being, just, patient, compassionate, and forgiving. And if the dominant culture is hateful, frightened, divisive, and demeaning, it is more important than ever for the church to be loving, confident, unifying, and respectful. We are to point to a new, healthier, more loving, and hopeful way, not to reinforce the profitable and opportunistic toxicities of the commentary class. And so I stick with all shall be well to clear my mind, to remind me, to refocus, and to turn me toward the good. And though I need frequent turning because it's very easy to slip, each slip allows a turn, and each turn is toward happiness and not bitterness. Not a happiness we achieve once and hold forever, but a happiness that we can turn toward again and again, many times, and glimpse and experience until it flees and we must find it again. Or maybe sometimes it finds us, as it does sometimes in the voice of my friend and colleague and our former interim minister here at UU Princeton, Reverend Meg Barnhouse, who put Julian's words to song. And I, for years now, have heard Meg's voice assure me that Julian was right, singing all shall be well. And in my own ever-developing theology that leaves plenty of room for growth and change, if Meg Barnhouse and Julian of Norwich agree on something, you can take it to the bank. If you Google Meg Barnhouse and All Will Be Well, you can hear the song on YouTube. It's lovely. It'll stay in your mind and heart, especially if you listen to it a lot, which I also recommend. That's a good way to find a happier mind again and again, to fill it with beauty, peace, playfulness, and love, to read, watch, and listen to that which brings optimism and goodness into one's thoughts, to fill one's mind with the good and true. That doesn't mean that we turn away forever from the trials and tribulations of the world, but it does mean that we turn toward the good stuff that makes life joyful, so that we are strong, balanced, and positive enough to engage all that is. For if we do not turn toward happiness and develop happiness in our mind, we will be consumed by the negativity and toxicity of these days. And then we will either contribute more of that or we'll shut down completely and give up, neither of which affords us a life of faith and commitment. But if we turn toward the beautiful, even though so much is profane, we'll have the energy and drive to be agents of change in the world. We'll inspire people and free them to do the same. We won't remove ourselves, and we won't further pollute what is already sorted. We'll bring something new and needed to our shared lives today. Love as an expression of God's original gift, or as our first moral commitment to one another and the stranger. This can be that which binds us to one another and the stranger. This love can be the string upon which those mala beads or prayer beads are strung. For while the beads are noticed and often beautiful and touched in the prayer and meditative practices themselves, without the string, the beads aren't connected. They fall away and get lost in the cracks of the pavement or are swept up in the dust or lost forever in the dirt. Those beads can't bring us back to the moment, to this mantra, to this place of faith, hope, and love, because we don't have them. It's the love that allows them to lead us, that allows us to grasp them, that allows us to develop again and again balanced minds that answer vice with virtue, peaceful minds that study war no more, and creative minds that imagine new possibilities and outcomes. I was swept into that space when I was stuck on that kayak in between the rocks. I eventually realized that my weight was helping to keep the kayak lodged where it was. And while I didn't think getting out of the kayak would help, I did realize that if I slid around so that I was sitting backwards in it, the current would probably catch it and pull it out of the rocks. I still thought I might fall out, but at that point it was kind of a nothing ventured, nothing gained situation. So I moved around and sat the wrong way, and the current took the kayak where the current wanted it to go, and I just went along for the ride. And indeed, all was well. And no worries came to me for the rest of the trip about what was to come, none of which could be handled at that moment anyway. Only water and sky and tree and rapids and teenagers and retired people and a longtime friend and some brand new ones, and a sense of being held by something much larger than all of us. Though there is always much to concern the mind, so too is there much to bless and comfort it. So too are the reasons for praise and peace, always in balance with those for concern and struggle. And so too must we choose in spiritual practice, in popular culture, in time spent with friends and loved ones, that which reminds us of happiness and joy, not once and forever, but each day and always. For life is a blessing that is meant to be enjoyed. And that process renews day by day, minute by minute, moment by moment. May it be so, and amen. And here at the end of our hour, we extinguish our chalice, knowing that its light carries us until we gather again. Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of greater love and greater kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with everyone else by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.